Hi, I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is Not Just Cute, the podcast, where we discuss all kinds of topics to help bridge the gap that exists between what we know and what we do in early childhood education. We're starting conversations with academics, authors, decision makers, educators, and parents so that together we can improve the quality of early childhood education, while at the same time protecting and respecting the childhood experience. Before we jump in, a quick reminder that the Why We Play letters are on special pricing right now. So if you're planning on using those to help educate parents and start conversations about the importance of play, this is the perfect time to grab them. We're all still figuring out what school is going to look like this coming year, but the fact that young children need play is a fact that hasn't changed. Really, I believe that parents need to know now more than ever why play is important, so that they can support it at home as well. Check those out and grab a sample letter at notjustcute.com/whyweplay. Today I'm talking with Vanessa Levin, experienced early childhood educator and creator of the wildly popular site Pre-K Pages, which is chock full of activities and resources for early childhood teachers. She's an accomplished trainer and advocate who is passionate about helping educators teach well and save time. I asked her to talk with me today about the importance of play in early childhood education, with some extra attention on how playful learning can go hand in hand with meeting objectives and promoting literacy. You can find show notes for this episode at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 34. I absolutely love talking with Vanessa. She has some really amazing insights to share in this episode, so let's get started. Welcome, Vanessa. I'm so excited to share you with the listeners here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. I'm super excited to be here.
So just in case we have any listeners today who are not familiar with you and the prolific work that you do, can you tell us just a little bit about your background in education and also the way that you're serving teachers today?
Sure. So I spent 20 years working with young dual language learners in public programs. And 17 of those years were as a classroom teacher, and the last 3 as a specialist. But now over at Pre-K Pages, we're focused on elevating the field of early childhood education while bridging the gap between early education and that world of K-12.
And that's so important. That's a whole other episode in and of itself that I would love to dive into, because that gap really does exist, and it's something I hear a lot about from teachers. One of the things I want to talk about today, though, and it may weave into that same gap issue as well, but I know you and I both share a lot of passions, and one of those is a passion for early childhood in general, like you said, that elevating the profession and the work that is done there in early childhood. And we also both have a passion for early literacy. And as we've both worked in those spheres, I know we both come across people who seem to think that intentionally teaching reading, quote unquote, and incorporating play-based practices are incompatible, whether that's the parent who is worried that all of this play is never going to get their child ready for reading, or whether that's coming from the play proponent who just gasps when you suggest that you should incorporate some literacy objectives. So how do you feel like those two approaches, a literacy focus as well as a play focus, how do those coexist for you?
Well, I think that, first of all, this is a great question. But we really, really have to, in my opinion, we really have to stop trying to pound square pegs into round holes. So by that, I mean, we can't force children to do something they're not ready for developmentally. So instead of thinking of our kids' brains as empty vessels that have to be filled with all this knowledge to eventually meet the standards, if you will, we have to teach the way that science has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, that young children learn best, and that's through play. So this is kind of a mindset shift, I think, and it goes against the way a lot of us think about teaching and learning, or perhaps the way that we experienced learning in our own schooling, right? So I think that, if we continue to struggle in this way by having these feelings, these conflicting feelings about play and learning, if you will, we're going to continue struggling to teach it, and our students are going to continue struggling to learn it, because you can teach anything through play. That I firmly believe that, including literacy skills and, of course, math and science, and everything can be taught through play. And sometimes I hear people counter with this argument, and that is, well, then why should we even send young kids to preschool if all they're going to do is play? And my response to that is, we can't just say children can learn through play and expect it to magically happen. Our role as professional educators is to carefully and intentionally create this environment and lessons that are going to facilitate learning in a very playful way. So one of the examples I like to use when I talk with teachers is, I'm sure you're familiar with this book, Amanda, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom by Bill Martin Jr.
Yes, classic.
Yes. So it's like a must read for any teacher of young children. And, just reading that book alone, I could probably list 15 different, now that I say it, of course, I'm challenging myself, and I don't know if I can make that down, but let's just say 15 different literacy skills through that book. And, not just the obvious, like teaching the rhythm and the rhyme of language when you read it aloud, but things like extending the learning in a playful way. I like to use metal canisters or cans and, put some fake greenery in the top after we read the story and give the kids some magnetic letters and invite them to act the story out with the magnetic letters on the tree. That is a rich, meaningful, playful activity that it supports so many literacy skills, and that's a standards thing, children, some of the standards say things like children must know all upper and lowercase letters of the alphabet, blah, blah, blah. That is an activity that would support meeting that standard in a fun and playful way. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you hit on so many things there that, as you talk about standards, it's so much the way that we interpret it and understand and apply it. And as you talked about play being a mindset, I love that. I think it's so important for us to get our head around that mindset of play. It's a whole approach that we bring to what we're doing. And one thing that I'll often say is that play is the method that we use, and the learning is the outcome, or the objectives. They can work together. We bring play as the method that we use to implement those objectives, that it's not either or. And I love that, the way you described that play isn't something, we know that children learn by play, but that doesn't mean that they just magically learn by play, but that we still as teachers need to be intentional and facilitate the play. I just think there's so much in there that is so powerful. You packed so much into just a few words that I was like, that's important.
Thank you.
So what do you think are some of these misconceptions that lead people to think that play and literacy, or play and any academic learning in general, that those are an either or proposition? Why do you think they come to that conclusion?
That is an excellent question. So I firmly believe that this misconception has grown quickly, even more so in more recent years, because of the extreme emphasis that our society has placed on, and I'm doing air quotes here, meeting the standards. So, for anyone listening, we have national standards here in the U.S. for our K-12 educational programs. And then many of our states have created their own standards for pre-K programs, which that's a whole other episode, another episode, Amanda. We're creating a series.
I was just going to say, we can have an entire series. This sounds really good.
You do all the hard work. I'll just show up and talk. But the thing that nobody tells us about the standards is that they don't include the prerequisites or the how, only the final outcome. And that is where the real root of the problem lies. So, for example, going back to that standard of all children must know, all upper and lowercase letters, like blah, blah, blah. That does not tell you a single thing about how they should learn the letters, right? What's the best way to teach the letters? It doesn't tell you anything other than they must know them. And so that's where we run into trouble, because some early childhood teachers, schools, or programs, they see these standards and they don't realize that they include the how, or the prerequisites, if you will. So there's prerequisites that go into learning the letters of the alphabet. So we start teaching to this standard and we completely skip all the important learning that needs to come before the standard can be successfully met. So we're jumping the gun, in my opinion, right? Yeah. We're going straight for we have to march through all these letters because there's not just 26, there's 26 upper and 26 lower, and we only have so many days in the week or in the year, and we have to do all these other things, and sometimes that pressure that we feel, that stress, is more perceived than it is real. So, for example, let's say, here's a good one, Amanda, writing a name. Have you ever had teachers tell you that writing a name is so important in preschool, right?
Right.
And it's something that, all early childhood teachers feel great pressure to get their kids to do. And again, whether that pressure is perceived or real is something different. But to have their students accomplish it is sometimes a measure of their own success. But forcing young children to write their entire names from day one and just practicing all year long isn't actually the best or the most effective way to teach a child to write their name. So we have to take into consideration these prerequisites, right, before we can actually meet the standards. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. So instead of just saying, my goal is we're going to learn how to write names, I need to be able to back up and say, so what do they need to know to be able to write names? They need to, what skills do they need to have? Not just what do they need to know, but, do they have the hand strength? Do they know how to hold a pencil? Can they make this shape or that shape? Do they know the letter? I mean, there's so many skills that go into that, that you have to back up and fill in those spots and not just jump in. Like you said, I just think you hit the nail on the head, and you said that there's this emphasis on the standards in and of themselves without looking at what comes to it. That those standards are often, so by the end of the year, we would like to see them accomplishing these things. So back up, what are the pieces that feed into that for each child? So one child may be at level, or step 1, and the other one's at step 2, step 3, but that we have to be able to back up and work on those skills rather than just jumping in at the standard and repeatedly doing that over and over. As you were talking, I'm such a metaphor analogy kind of a person, and I thought, I did high jump in high school, and I thought when I trained for high jump, I had my goal. I wanted to clear 5.2 or whatever was this goal that I had. But I didn't walk into practice and set the bar at 5.2 and just go at it every day. I had drills, so they had to break down the process. I had jumping drills and these sprinting drills and I had a weight workout, and I had all these different things. And then I started not at 5.2, I started much lower. And it's similar. I mean, there's so many other tasks that we tackle that way. We say, okay, here's my goal. Let me break it down into little pieces and start. That's how they teach us. But when we get fixated on, here's the end goal. I want them to write their name. Therefore, we will just write their names over and over and over and over.
Right. And isn't that a definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results?
Right. And that just kind of neglecting this idea that there's a process, and in that a developmental process that we need to start with before we get to that end result, that we're looking at the end result and missing the journey and what it's going to take to get through that. So
I think,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that, and it's not the teacher's fault. I mean, I've met so many teachers, as I'm sure you have, who have just had the standards plunked down on their desk and said, teach these, without much else, much more direction given to them than that. And so taking at face value, I can totally see how teachers can feel that perceived pressure. I know I certainly felt it when I was in the classroom. As our state changed the standards over the years, I would feel this intense pressure whenever they came out with updated standards, because then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm already teaching as hard as I can. How can I fit any more on my plate? And it was up to me to figure out how I can do that and what that method is going to look like. So a lot of times I feel like our early childhood teachers are really left out in the cold when it comes to all of these standards that are out there. And they're not, because of that gap that exists between K-12, they're not getting the training that they need, and they're not getting the resources that they need and the support they need in order to do their jobs well, like a lot of their K-12 counterparts do.
Mm-hmm. And to add to that struggle, the flip side of that is I've seen instances where they are being given, a curriculum or a certain support, and it is misinterpreting what the objective is. So just as one example, there's, I think in one of the objectives, it says something along the lines of that I'm thinking this is for kindergarten, that they'll begin to read sight words, high frequency words. But then I did a quick search on my own, and I found anywhere from 25 to 100 words on lists across different curricula, and so teachers are being handed something, and everybody says this meets the standard, this meets the standard, this meets the standard. And so it's this double-edged sword where there's one side where they're not getting any direction or support and just getting these objectives plopped down, and on the other hand, where maybe they're being handed, whether it's from their district or from a friend or from a search online, just a variety of input that just runs the gamut of here's how I interpret the standards, and having to filter through that, sift through that to find out what does this standard actually mean for the kids in my class. And for me as a teacher, it can be really overwhelming.
That is a really, really great point. And I'm glad you brought it up, because you're absolutely right. There is that aspect there where sometimes they're given things that are touted as helping them to meet the standards, and they actually themselves, the things they're given, are misinterpretations. I've totally seen that as well. And then it just causes confusion. The last thing you want is a stressed, confused teacher, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You can't teach. First of all, little children require the utmost of patience and composure, and, every ounce of your being needs to be there when you're teaching little children. And if you add any extra stress, worry, pressure to that, you're not creating a successful recipe there.
Right. Absolutely. So when we find ourselves in this situation where there's this overemphasis, and you're right, I was actually just reading a study this morning that was looking at, over spans of time. And that was actually one of the questions they asked, how important is it that the children in your classroom are like meeting state and national standards or something along those lines? And this is in that benchmark study as kindergarten, the new first grade. And that was one of the questions that they asked, they looked at in 1998 and 2010. And there was this huge jump. In 1998, it was in the minority, I guess I care, about these standards. And then in 2010, there's this huge jump saying, oh yeah, that is very, very important that these children meet these standards. So there's this documented increase in this emphasis and preoccupation with the standards. And then you add to that this challenge that the interpretation of the standards and how we apply those. And so how does this recipe, this perfect storm, create this situation where people feel like there's no room for play anymore? I guess that's where we find ourselves.
Exactly. I think that's exactly where we find ourselves. And the thing about it is that these types of shifts don't take place overnight. They happen so gradually that by the time you look up, you're like, whoa, how did things change that fast? It's because it takes root over time, right? So we went from 98, what did you say, 98 to 2010?
Yeah.
And we had this huge shift that occurred, but I bet if you look at each single year, that number increased and increased and increased until, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I can, as a teacher being in the classroom in 2010, I can definitely tell you that my outlook had shifted, and the way that I perceived what was expected of me and what was expected of the children had drastically changed between those years, you know?
And that isn't to say that standards in and of themselves are the problem. I think we all want to
Right.
have, right, some concept of and some objective measurements. And I always say any good teacher, you know, when we get in these arguments about objectives or assessments, I say any good teacher uses objectives and assessments. It's a question of how we use them and which ones we use, and, you know, all of those. So what do you think are the misconceptions around play that lead people to believe that if I'm going to use objectives and meet these standards, then I can't be using play? I don't have room, or I don't. What's the misconception about play that leads us to think those can't coexist?
Yes, I love it. So I believe that there's this idea that some people hold, and that's not always the teachers. It could be administrators. It could be anybody. But there's sometimes this idea that play equals chaos. And that could not be further from the truth, in my opinion. Playful learning does not have to be chaos. And I can say that with complete and utter confidence because it was never like that in my own classroom, but yet I used playful learning. So playful learning, I like to call it playful learning, because if you just say, because if you just say play, a lot of people will just think chaos. But playful learning actually increases student engagement. So for example, if you've ever had a child that spends maybe a long time in one center, like the dramatic play center, but when it comes to sitting down and listening to a story or writing their name, their attention span is tiny. So what their behavior they're exhibiting tells us is that when they're playing, they're naturally engaged. And this is what increases their attention span. So instead of constantly forcing them to, forcing that square peg into the round hole again, let's use that natural thing that they have, that innate nature of play, right? That's how they learn. The research is all there. That is how they learn. Let's use that to our advantage and make all learning playful. And then it's going to be so much easier. And we're going to not waste all that time trying to get them to do things that they're just not physically able to do because of their age. So, they're even motivated to write their own name in the dramatic play center. While they're there, they're taking food orders, or they're writing, pretend words on shopping lists. They do this without complaint because they're motivated and they're playing, which is exactly how they learn, right?
Absolutely. There's that, that old saying that if they're not learning the way that we're teaching, maybe we need to teach the way that they learn, right? I mean, and it seems so obvious.
Right. Exactly.
And I like to say that play or playful learning is really so efficient because, just like you said, they're so much more engaged. And because the play is so diverse like you said, in a dramatic play center, they're not just working on one skill. There's multiple skills going on all at once. And they're so motivated and engaged to do it. And they're more likely to stick with it longer. I mean, it's just such an efficient method to go at rather than banging our head against the wall of worksheets because that's what we think it's supposed to look like.
Exactly. And can I use an example a better example to illustrate that?
Oh, please do.
So I have a 3-year-old nephew. He's actually 3.5 now as we're talking. And he has had a lot of difficulty in preschool, and he has been sent home numerous times for not listening, not behaving. And his parents are just beside themselves with, the whole, what are we doing wrong type of a thing. And when actually it's nothing they're doing wrong. He is just a 3.5-year-old little boy with a short attention span, which is natural for his age. So I was talking to his mom last night, and she was telling me about how they had gone down on a nature walk, and they had found a frog the day before. And my nephew was so excited about this frog, and they brought it back to the house. They have a little, like marshy area behind their house, and they had a little baby pool. So they put some water in it. They put it next to this marshy area. And he spent 2 hours playing with the frog and watching the frog and asking questions about the frog and wanting to learn more about the frog. And so I said that was his school for the day. Like that was where he learned more in that time frame than he did when he was, being told to sit and listen to a story. I'm not saying that preschool is bad.
Right.
I'm just saying that certain children learn in certain ways. And when we try to force that square peg into the round hole, because he is that square peg, because his classmates, his parents always argue with me, his classmates can sit and listen to the story. His classmates can, and that's because all children are different. Right. And, they all learn at different paces. They mature differently. And he can be engaged for hours if it is the right way, So
finding that way and finding what engages them. And I think, like you said, that goes back to that mindset you mentioned of having a playful mindset and a playful approach really opens you up to say, well, what way could we make this more engaging, more playful, more fun, rather than a mindset that says, this standard must always look like this. And this is the square hole that it's always, or the round hole that the square peg must be shaved into to fit. Instead, it's looking at, what could this look like? I think that playful mindset really opens you up to say, this could look a lot of different ways. What could it look like?
Right. Exactly.
So as a literacy expert, I hope you're okay with me giving you that label, because I feel like it's true.
Sounds good to me.
As a literacy expert and also an advocate for play, do you have a favorite element of literacy that you love to teach?
Oh, goodness. That's a tough one. That's kind of like saying, which is your favorite child?
Right. Which my boys like to ask me all the time. I keep dodging.
Yes, of course. So I would have to say the alphabet, hands down. There is just something so special about introducing children to something that they're going to need and use for the rest of their lives. And it's so important that we get it right. And we do it in a way that honors them and the way they learn. Because if they don't like it, right? If they don't like the alphabet, like if they don't embrace it, imagine the negative impact that could have on their future lives and the lives of their own children. I mean, it's a huge burden to bear, but it's also so rewarding when you do it in fun and playful ways to see how the children just thrive and grow. It's like giving them the keys to the kingdom, really.
Right. And you see them light up with that, right? When they feel like they have ownership of this alphabet, it is theirs. That I think that's an exciting part of it as well, to see that excitement from them.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more.
So do you have some favorite ways to make that playful? Because I think, again, back to what you're saying about getting too fixed on the objective. So the objective is we will teach the alphabet, right? Which is an important objective, to teach the alphabet. But that can be broken down into so many, many smaller parts.
Right.
So do you have do you have any favorites or good examples?
So I like to say flat is boring and 3D is fun, because what do we learn about the alphabet by, connecting the picture of the airplane to the letter A with the pencil? Like, the only thing we learn about that is that I can draw a straight line.
Right.
So I like to incorporate 3-dimensional ways into each of my, whatever, if you like to call them lessons or play invitations or whatever you want to call them, because play is how children learn, and they need to put their hands on the letters in order for something to become meaningful to a child, right? It has to have some kind of concrete aspect to it. And letters are, let's face it, they're abstract concepts, right? These little things have meaning. What? That's like so foreign to a child. So we have to give them meaning, and by providing them with things they can put their hands on. And when I say things, I'm talking about, magnetic letters, or, for example, going back to my nephew again, and his parents are really worried, as I think all parents are, that, he's not learning or learning enough or learning quickly enough or whatever. And they really want him to know his name, like to recognize his name in print and to say all the letters. And that's just something they've placed on themselves. I think it's like their measure of his success or whatever. Mm-hmm. But he has no interest whatsoever in this standard they have imposed on themselves. So I was thinking back to my own classroom, where we would write letters, I should say, on the tops of little race cars, mm-hmm. and then I made a little parking lot out of a cardboard box with the letters written in there. And you know what? That was so fun. I mean, the kids gravitated towards the cars and make a parking lot. Oh my gosh. Yeah. My cars can park there. And then maybe calling attention to, oh, this letter here, I wonder where the parking spot for this letter is, and making it playful and fun. And I shared that idea with my brother and sister-in-law, and they were like, oh my gosh, he played like that for like 45 minutes.
This boy who can't sit still and focus, right?
Right. He had so much fun. He was saying the names of the letters, and he loved parking the wrong letters in the wrong spots just to see if he could trick us. I'm like, yes, that is perfect. That is exactly how he learns, So.
And I just think you hit on something so important there when you say this is really ultimately a very abstract concept, and we can't keep trying to teach abstract concept with more abstract, mm-hmm. by using a piece of paper with like you said, a flat thing that is just as abstract as the alphabet itself. But when you make it 3D, mm-hmm. you give some concreteness to this abstract concept. I mean, when you lay it out that way, it seems so obvious.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, just think about it. I have a cousin whose name is Lincoln, and you better believe that he knows the models of every car on the road, because there isn't a car named after him, in his opinion.
Right.
The Lincoln. And so he has learned, whenever he goes into the parking lot of any, grocery store or whatever, he likes to play, let's find my car.
Right.
And in the process of that, he has learned all the different makes and models and the letters associated with those. And so he loves to talk about VW, and they all have these great logos, right? So environmental print. I was so impressed that he had made that connection, that was his car, and then kind of taught himself the letters by becoming fascinated by other cars. And it was just such a natural way for him to learn. And then he asked me, he said, what kind of car do you drive? Because I saw him at a wedding of a distant family member, and I was not in a car. I had flown there. And he said, what kind of car do you drive? And so I told him, and he immediately was like, oh, I know the letter that starts with.
Right. Because it's meaningful, right? It's this meaningful hook, and that may be different for different children, but it's always going to be something that is more concrete, more playful, more meaningful for them.
Exactly. He made the alphabet his own, mm-hmm. in a meaningful way. And I think that is just brilliant, especially for a 3-year-old. He's also 3.
Absolutely. So
just amazing.
Fun. I love seeing that excitement, that blossoming as they get so excited about owning that knowledge, or owning the alphabet, or owning their names. So exciting.
Exactly.
Well, you've given so many great insights and perspectives and tools to use. And I know this is something that you're very good at. You do this a lot. And I feel like we're just skimming the surface of what you have to offer. And I know that you do a lot of work supporting and helping teachers. And in particular, you have an event coming up that is so valuable and so helpful, really exciting for early educators. Do you want to tell a little bit about that event coming up for listeners, and so they can get an idea of what's in store?
Sure. So this will be our 3rd year of the Soar to Success Summit. And so it's an a professional development conference for early childhood educators that takes place entirely online. And this year it will be July 16th through the 20th. And what I really like about it is that you can watch it from the comfort of your own home at your convenience. We like to call it PD in your PJs. And this year we've decided to focus the entire conference around one topic, and that topic is play. So I'm super excited. We have some amazing speakers lined up this year, including you, Amanda.
I am so excited.
Yes, and Dr. Jean is giving our keynote address, and we have just so many amazing speakers. And what makes the summit different from a traditional conference, the one where you would travel to or, have to pay for hotels or meals or whatever, this conference is different in that not only is it online, but each session is free to watch for 24 hours. So everybody can attend. So it's kind of like going to a large national conference and then them letting you in for free. And then at the end, if you'd like a certificate or any extended access or any of that, then you can purchase a ticket. Like, what national conference does that? None of them.
Right. It's so awesome. Such a great opportunity.
Yes. And we're super excited about this year's summit. And we'd love to have, anyone join us that's interested in the education of young children.
This is fantastic. And you always do such a wonderful job and bring in so many amazing people. And I'm really grateful to be able to be a part of it. And especially with the topic that you chose. I was excited as soon as I saw the invitation, but then when I saw the topic, I didn't know I could get more excited, but I got more excited about the topic.
Awesome. Yeah, I knew as soon as we selected the topic, I already had you in mind as a speaker. I'm like, oh, we could talk about that for an entire 20 hours.
I love it. Anytime.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for all of the work and the support that you offer to the profession, which is not just to the teachers, but to the children and the families. It's really just such a wealth. And you've been so generous today, but in all of the work that you've done, so generous in putting that out there to make it accessible for people. So thank you so much for what you're doing for young children and for families and for teachers. And thanks for showing up and sharing some insights with us today.
Oh, I was completely honored to be here. And same right back at you, girlfriend. You are just amazing as well. And I'm just so glad that I got to chat with you in this way on this platform. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always so much fun. Thanks again for listening to Not Just Cute, the podcast. You can find show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 34. You'll also find a link to register for Vanessa's Soar to Success Summit. Like she mentioned, this is the third year that she's been providing this online summit for early educators, and I can tell you it really is such an amazing event each time. This year in particular, the fact that you can get access to a high-quality professional development conference without leaving your home is a huge win. Plus, as she mentioned, you can watch every single session for free for 24 hours after each one posts. You only pay if you want to upgrade to extended access and attendance certification. The accessibility that she's created here is really commendable, and the lineup of speakers that she has is amazing. I mean, like she mentioned, I was fortunate enough to be included, but listen to this lineup. She has people like Dr. Jean Feldman speaking on the power of play, musician Laurie Berkner on playful music, author Eric Litwin on the power of joyful reading, Jamie White of Play to Learn Preschool on making circle time more playful, book expert Charnay Gordon of Here We Read on diverse and inclusive books, and really that list is literally just a tiny fraction of the lineup for the summit. Make sure that you catch this summit starting on July 16th by getting registered today. Head on over to the show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 34 to get signed up. I'm Amanda Morgan. You can read more on my blog and sign up for the Not Just Cute newsletter at notjustcute.com. And follow me on Facebook. That's facebook.com/notjustcute. I'm also fairly freshly on Instagram, so follow me there at Amanda_notjustcute. Thanks for listening today, and as always, thank you for standing up for children and for childhood.